Great. Thank you so much, Carl. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first meeting of the Recovery with Equity Task Force. I am so excited. I just got a text from someone who said, "Are you excited?" I'm like, I am so pumped because this opportunity to be in conversation with all of you is probably at the height of the reason that I took this job. I think there is nothing more important for the state of California than to be thinking about how do we bake into our higher education systems an opportunity to lift up equity as a central focus of our collective work. It is certainly my driving force, and I know for many of you it is yours as well. And there's certainly a way in which the COVID crisis has not only magnified where those inequities exist, but also have presented new ways of thinking about what we could do about them. And back in, I think it was April, we had the Council on Higher Education, Post-Secondary Education together, and we started talking about how we should be thinking about the long term, not just the immediate term. At which point I had the good fortune of going off with Monica Lozano, my great thinking partner. And we really started to just noodle on what could we do differently? How could we think about the stages of this pandemic, the opportunities to recover in ways that really help move us towards our goal, as we are obviously all in the midst of also managing the immediacy of this crisis. And it was from those sets of conversations that this idea was born. It was incredibly important to me that we have a wide range of thinkers who are fundamentally centered in equity, which is how all of you got invited. Most of you I know, some of you I don't, but your work and your reputation precedes you, and we're just delighted to have you sitting at this virtual table with us to really think about how we move California's higher education systems forward. You've all seen the list of who's on this call, and I know over the course of the months that we'll be spending together, we'll have an opportunity to get to know one another well. But we really tried to design this for California in ways that really had us invite in people who were known nationally and internationally for their equity-based work, people who are a part of our higher education systems who we know have a deep and unabiding commitment to equity, and people who are not necessarily in leadership in our higher education systems, but are fundamental in helping to move those systems from their various perches. And so we thought bringing those folks together to really think about this question of where equity fits, where the systems can go, how we get them more aligned would be nirvana. And so that is what this is about. We are very, very fortunate to have guiding us and leading us through this Education First. They come to this work with as deep and abiding a commitment to equity as we all have. And equally important, they come to this work with the perfect blend of expertise in policy and expertise in process. And so they'll really be our tour guides, if you will. They'll be taking us through. I've heard from many of you about the quality of the reading materials in advance. Much of that was put together by them. So I know that they are really going to be, as we all are, we're going to all be pedaling pretty fast to make sure that we're each trying to stay in front of where we all are. But I know that we are in very good hands when it comes to Education First. And so I just want to start by welcoming them and welcoming all of you. One other word before I pass it off to them, which is when I have been thinking about what this opportunity offers for us, I've been thinking about the framework of start, stop, keep. What is it that higher education systems, all of us together, need to start doing that we're not doing now? What is it that we need to stop doing that we have been doing? And we're very bad in higher education about stopping things. It's really hard for us to say, no, we're not going to do that anymore because interests get entrenched. And then what is it that we need to keep doing that we are doing well, that we know moves the ball for our students? So I ask all of you to be thinking about that same framework of start, stop, keep. And to be thinking about, and we'll talk a little bit more about goals, but to be thinking about how we want to work together. There are lots of ways to think about how we can work together. And we decided that we wanted to try to affect some blend of not just of creating a coalition of the willing, that it's essential to have our higher education systems sitting at this table, and it's essential for all of us to push one another. So we wanted to really think about how do we get everyone together to drive towards consensus about what needs to happen on behalf of students, knowing that everyone's coming to the table in good faith, rather than our usual tools and tasks, which is legislation or regulation or an executive order. So really this table is really designed with that in mind, and with the idea that we will have honest conversation, potentially even painful conversation at times, but everyone holding the same goal of getting to the place of a much more equitable future for our students. So with that, I want to just say thank you all for taking the time, for making the commitment to this process and to the journey, and I will pass it over to Susan.
Thank you, Londe. We are thrilled at Education First to be with you on this journey, and want to just give you a sense of who's with you in the virtual room as we're going forward. If you could advance the slides, that would be great. There's a team kind of here to help you to mine your brains, to reach out to the students in California and listen carefully to them and their needs and what they are experiencing, so that the changes that we bring to the system with your help, with your implementation, your good thinking, is deeply informed by the students who will be experiencing them. And that's a really important aspect of the work. And I'm Susan Bodery. I'm a partner with Education First and have been there for about 11 years. I know some of you on the phone, so it's nice to see you again. And others I look forward to getting to know more personally, and we will over time. Joining me today is Carl Christopher, who's the project manager, who's a senior consultant with us. Jackie King, who's collaborating with us and has deep roots in the state of California. Carl is a California resident and has been there most of his life, if not all of his life. Calls himself a Californian. I can only claim to be born there. Meg Ramey, who is one of our analysts working on this project, and also Mario Jackson, who's a collaborator working with us on research. And so together, our team's goal is to look at the data that's in front of us, deeply work to hear the voices of students and of all kinds of students, and we'll talk about that in a moment, in the regions, to understand their experiences, what they hope higher education will look like and help them to accomplish, and the kinds of supports and challenges that they are looking forward to experiencing in the state of California. We'll bring that together with research and with the good thinking that you are bringing to the table and many others in order to identify some of the innovations, change, and the start, stop, keep framework that Londe talked about. And we want to focus a lot on the fact that you all are professionals and have deep experience and a commitment. And there are many, many things that we can do together to create the kind of student experience that's necessary in order to drive the equity that California deserves, wants, and needs for the future. So that's a little bit about who we are, and we'll get to know each other throughout the process. But I also want to make sure that we can do some proper introductions of each other. So what I'd love to do is to go around the virtual room, and I have you as a Brady Brunch group on my screen, so I'll call on you individually if that works, so that we can speed up the process, and ask you to just say your name, your affiliation, what organization you're with, and one word about how you're feeling about today or this process. So one key word, and I'll start to give you a moment to think about that. My key word is hopeful. That's how I'm feeling today. So as I look around the screen, what I'd love to do is, if I could, Mildred, if I could start with you, because you were an early comer to the room. Mildred, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling invigorated. And my name is Millie Garcia. I'm the president of American Association of State Colleges and Universities. Spent 11 years as president of 2 CSU campuses.
Thank you. Michael, wife, how about you?
Hi, I'm feeling excited. I think that there's so much to look forward to with this group and honored, honestly. By the way, I'm Michael Wiafe. I am a student. I just graduated from San Diego State University about a month and a half ago, and I'm starting my master's degree at UC Berkeley in the fall. I am truly living the student experience, so I am under my bed and trying to conserve room in my space in my room. And I just moved to Berkeley, so there's not much space here with the small rooms, but making as much as I can.
Great. Deborah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deborah Santiago. I am the CEO and co-founder of Excelencia in Education based in Washington, D.C. And my one word is committed.
Monica.
My name is Monica Lozano. I'm the president of College Futures Foundation, based here in California. And my one word is optimistic.
Haley.
Hi, everyone. My name is Haley Weddle. I'm a recent graduate from UC San Diego. I just transitioned from being a PhD student to being a postdoc researcher studying education and equity. I also served on the Board of Regents for the past 2 years. My word is empowered.
Ben.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Ben Cannon. I'm the executive director of Oregon's Higher Education Coordinating Commission, the state agency that coordinates all of post-secondary education in your neighbor to the north. And my word is curious. I'm looking forward to learning and contributing.
Nathan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nathan Brostrom. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the University of California system. But as of 5 days ago, I was serving as the interim chancellor at UC Merced, which is our youngest and fastest growing campus. I think I will share Monica's word. I'm very, very optimistic, not only about this process, but coming off of my year at Merced and spending time with those students.
Judy.
Good afternoon, Judy Sakaki, president at Sonoma State. The first word that came into mind was hopeful, but you already said that, Susan, so I'm going to change to positive. Positive. I'm feeling very positive.
Great. Bridget.
Hi, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance, and I am based up here in Portland, Oregon. And I think my word, you said hopeful. I'm hopeful to be of service.
Wonderful. Michelle Cooper.
Hi, I'm Michelle Cooper. I'm president of the Institute for Higher Education Policy in Washington, D.C. And my word is also optimistic.
Lauren.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have the great pleasure of serving as Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs for the California State University Chancellor's Office. I share Ben Cannon's sentiment. Curious is my word.
Great. Daisy.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Daisy Gonzalez. I'm the Deputy Chancellor at the California Community College's Chancellor's Office, and I'm feeling inspired seeing old colleagues and new leaders who are joining us in this work.
Michelle Siqueiros.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Siqueiros. I am the president of the Campaign for College Opportunity. It's wonderful to share a Zoom screen with all of you. Many of you are my heroes and sheroes, so it's awesome to be in this space. I'm gonna say heavy is how I feel about this time, to be totally honest.
Brian Daly.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Daly, former student trustee for the City College of San Francisco and former student advocate with Students Making a Change. I'm a newly transferred student entering the UC Berkeley's College of Natural Resources. And to be honest, I'm a bit anxious today. That's my word.
Sean.
Good afternoon. I'm Sean Harper. I am a professor at the University of Southern California, founder and executive director of the USC Race and Equity Center, and president of the American Educational Research Association. My one word is grateful.
Keith.
My name is Keith Curry, President, CEO of Compton College. I think my one word is probably excited. Excited about being here today to be involved in this conversation.
Tim.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Tim Rennick. I'm the Senior Vice President of Student Success at Georgia State University in Atlanta. I'm also a professor here. And my word, I guess, is passionate because I feel very strongly about these issues.
Gabrielle.
Hi, I'm Gabby Starr. I'm the president of Pomona College in Claremont, California. My one word is determined. I am determined not to waste time because it seems to be very pressing.
Wonderful. Ria?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ria Bott. I'm the Director of Public Policy at College Futures Foundation and supporting the EdFirst team around this task force. And I am enthusiastic and excited for today.
Great. And since I introduced the EdFirst folks, we're going to keep their powder dry until we get into small groups. But what I'd love to do is to just give me one word, Londe. You're so good at bringing us up. I think that if you bring us home on the council members, what's your word right now?
Inspired. Inspired.
Wonderful. And on that note, we're going to get to work. All of you seem to not necessarily need the kind of Zoom protocols that we usually put forward. You're muting yourself appropriately and unmuting when you need to speak, and we encourage you to do that. And we really want today to be a dialogue. So as we think about what we're going to be doing today, we are going to be spending some time together in full group talking about equity, getting our charge from Londe. And then we're going to be spending some time in small groups, really mining your brains about what are you seeing in the space, what are some of the things that you are seeing students experience and need, and what are some of the potential solutions that are on the top of your mind right now. We're going to start this work by turning it back over to Carl or to Londe for a moment to talk about how this work fits together with the mission and the vision. She's done a little bit of that already, but want to invite her back to spend a little bit more time on the
Great, thank you. So I mentioned a little bit already about how this group came to be. And I think for me, I'm very mindful of when you're in the governor's office and you have the kind of vigorous and robust higher education systems that California has, there is at once many things you can do and very little that you can do all at the same time. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were clear about what our purpose was and how it related to other efforts that we have going. As you know, the governor does have the council, and that council is continually involved in it and engaged in the questions of how they can be doing their work in a collective way, in a much more, I hesitate to say integrated, because I think when we use that word, it suggests changing laws and revisiting the master plan, which I am not want to do, but really in a much more coordinated and intertwined way, perhaps, so that as we do work as systems and as we promote the work of the systems, we're really thinking about how is it that students are moving through. And I like to say that, oftentimes students that go to college, while they sometimes choose institutions, their main goal is to get the degree. And sometimes it's from that institution, sometimes they just want the degree. So what we're trying to really think through at the meta level is how do we ensure that, whatever follows from the pandemic and the ensuing economic crisis offers an opportunity for California to recover in a way that is much more integrated, if you will, or coordinated and aligned, that speaks to the kind of resilience that we already know our students have, but that we want to support in our systems, that uplifts the notion of equity as a central and guiding principle for all of our institutions, and that is fundamentally also aligned with the needs of the state. And when I say aligned with the needs of the state, I think about it from two levels. One is that we want to help students move through college and move through college at a reasonable pace. I know that we are now often measure time to degree in 6 years. I always say I have 3 children. I have no desire to pay for 18 years of college. So I really do think, some of that means helping students to move through at a pace that works for them, but that holds a standard that is not 6 years, that comes closer to 4 years. Not everyone can do that, but I suspect that many more could if we had the kinds of institutional systems and supports that actually lifted up that as a primary goal. And that also thinks about what happens on the other side of college, that a college degree without a job is ultimately an empty promise. And we want to make sure that students have opportunity. And so whatever that degree is in, we want to make sure that there is demand on the other side of college for that student's skills, their abilities, the resources that they bring. And so we want to make sure that from a state's perspective, we're holding both of those as well. So the approach you see at the bottom of the slide, equity-driven, student-centered, and committed to coherence between our higher education segments. And that's really what this is about. We want to use this process to imagine and reimagine what the future can look like, and then think through what does that mean in terms of the discrete types of decisions that need to be made at the institutional level and the state level in order to bring about that much more coherent future that we imagine for our students. So that is from whence we come and from where we think we are going.
Thanks so much for that, Londe. Susan, I think I can take it from here. Colette, can you advance to the next slide, please? And one more. So the purpose of today is to let you all talk with one another. So I'm going to be as brief as possible with this, but we want to make sure you all are clear around the way we see this process evolving over the next few months and where we're headed. So at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that our ultimate charge is to produce a set of actionable recommendations from this work that'll go to Governor Newsom as well as leaders across the state to really inform what our best thinking and learning has shared in terms of what we'd recommend for the system of the state to really recover with equity in a way that meets students that are most vulnerable and most in need in the right ways. And so we've scheduled 5 meetings over the course of the next several months. And it'll be a balance of you all engaging with one another, sharing your expertise, and also, a lot of solution generating, but also be integrated with some heavy stakeholder engagement and input. And so what you see is a balance between our general task force meetings, as well as some working group meetings that we're going to have, but also we're going to be sure to make sure that we're going always back to stakeholders along the way to make sure that they're helping to inform us properly in terms of what the real need is from a student-centered standpoint. So today's meeting, we're going to let you all really just bubble up a lot of ideas, and we want you to kind of share and don't think about limits, think about just the vision and really getting at the heart of what equity really means and what it needs to represent. And then when we come back for our second meeting, we will have had quite a few regional conversations with some key regions throughout the state of California, which include the Bay Area, the San Joaquin Valley, the LA region, the Inland Empire, and the Imperial Valley. We're going to bring that back to you in the next meeting to really let you absorb and hear on the front lines what we're hearing from stakeholders and families and students across the diverse regions across the state. And so we'll always try to have that balance of tapping into your expertise, but always bringing back the insights and the voices and the lived experience of folks across the state. So coming out of our second meeting, we look to launch what we call these bi-weekly working groups, which would be subsections of the broader task force that go deeper around taking the insights and the root causes and the priorities that emerge from our second meeting and just going deeper and trying to get organized around some of those solution areas and thinking about what options, constraints, and scenarios could look like for this work and possible solutions. So those working groups will constantly be going deeper, but bringing that information back to the larger task force group. And the task force from meetings 3, 4, and 5 will be vetting and giving feedback on all those solution options, paying specific attention to the intersegmental gaps that introduce challenges for students, always making sure that we're trying to take a student-centered approach with everything that we're looking at. And then we'll spend the last couple of meetings really refining those solution sets and those options and possible scenarios, and trying to form them into some actionable strategies and timeframes that will then feed into what will become our final task force recommendations. So we're really excited about the process. We know that it does include quite a bit of structure and sequencing, but we are going to make sure that we try to always leverage you all and what you're bringing to this work thoroughly and thoughtfully, but also balancing that with what we're going to learn and continue learning from stakeholders along the way. So Colette, if you can just advance to one more slide, and then once we talk about the expectations for this work, we're going to take maybe like 3 minutes for 1 or 2 clarifying questions. So next slide, Colette, thank you. You all saw this in some of the pre-reading, but we just want to ground ourselves in some really important norms. And so as Lande spoke to earlier, we want to be equity driven, we want to be student centered, we want to think about making sure that all the segments and system actors are really behaving with coherence and partnership in mind. But we also want to make sure that we're thinking about students first. And so we're asking, leave the institutional hats at the door, which means when we're in this group together, we represent the people of the state. We represent what the collective can do with their shared knowledge. So this isn't necessarily about what one institution or what one segment can do. It's really about what the collective group can advance. In terms of ongoing interrogation of our expertise and assumptions, this is more for us to hold ourselves accountable to say, like, while we do know a lot and we bring a lot to this experience, we also want to learn along the way. And so our job at Education First is to make sure that we are constantly bringing forth the voices and the insights and the expertise from folks throughout the regions of the state, because their voice and their lived experience really, really matters. And we always want to be checking the things that we think we know about what could work against what the realities are going on in communities across the state. And the last thing I'll say is just with the coalition of the willing, that spirit is just that as this work moves forward, we know that there may be certain things that are going to be more challenging to do, say from a legislative standpoint or from other constraints. We don't want to let that bind us down. And so we want to be really smart about coming out of this process with things that are actionable and things that we know we can actually move and things that we know will have impact. So we're always going to be looking for those solutions and those strategies that really do tap into and leverage those willing agents of change and those willing avenues and venues to really move this work forward. So just wanted to pause there to make sure we all kind of have the right lens or the way we're going to approach this work. And the box at the bottom does say this is a living list. So you all will help build this and shape this as we move forward. And so as we move forward, if there are other norms and expectations that we want to add to this work, we'll make sure to track that as well. And Colette, if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, I'm tracking our time and we're a little bit behind. So Colette, if you could just take us off of screen share for a couple of minutes. If folks have literally, because we want you all to talk to one another. If you have like 1 or 2 clarifying questions, we'd love to take those now between either the EdFirst team or Lande. And then once we get through that, we'll jump into the real work of the day. So any clarifying questions from the group?
Yeah, I have just one, and I'll be brief. I totally appreciated the student-centeredness of this work. I am wondering, though, are we also going to concern ourselves with equity as it pertains to employees and workers in the higher education system? There was a really powerful piece in The Atlantic this morning about how the higher education workplace has long been inequitable, but there are certain inequities that have for sure been exacerbated in the workforce on college and university campuses during the pandemic.
Great question, Sean. I can answer that, but I love the way Lande discussed it, the way we're trying to integrate workforce. So Lande, you want to just kind of say a few words about how we absolutely plan to prioritize the needs of working adults and returning adults to the higher education system.
Yeah, I think, though, your question is about our existing workforce at the institutions. Is that correct? Yeah, Sean. I think it seems to me that we have to be holding that, that is a part of, if we want to be equity-centered institutions, we have to be thinking about all parts of the institution, and that would include thinking about the employees at those institutions. I want to be mindful of how we can both be aspirational in terms of thinking through that without, and recognizing what our lane is in terms of we're not the ones who are responsible for negotiating contract with organized labor or anything along those lines. But that's not to say that we can't speak about what does it mean to uphold equity as a central principle across all elements of an institution and where that could fit in. So I think that is definitely on the table.
Thanks, Sean. Maybe one other question before we move forward. Lauren, I see you raised your hand, so do you want to?
I was just going to piggyback off of what Sean mentioned, and that is the fact that there is a natural connection between students of the retention and recruitment of students of color and the retention and recruitment of faculty and staff of color. So there is a natural link that's already here that would allow us to have that kind of conversation about staffing and employees on campuses.
Really appreciate that comment and that extra insight. And as I said, we're building as we go. And so we're actually going to be jumping into conversation about defining equity for this work. And so when it comes to stakeholders that are important, they need to be prioritized. There's absolutely room for that with the faculty and staff at institutions. So thank you so much for those thoughtful questions. Colette, if you could take us back to screen sharing, and we're going to jump into our conversation about equity. And just one more slide, Colette. And if you could make it presentation setting, that'd be great so we all can see it a little bit better. And while Colette is doing that, it's okay, it's fine. I'll get us started. So we sent in advance of the call a equity framework that really laid out our commitments that we want to see the task force make to make sure that at every step of this process and every phase, we're very clear and explicit about how we're going to be prioritizing and making this an equity-focused process. And so this slide just kind of captures what you already read in that pre-reading, which is we have these 5 phases of the work: vision setting, research collection and data, stakeholder engagement, coherence and scenario development, and the recommendations and dissemination. And so for every part of our process, it is essential that we have to not make assumptions about the way equity needs to be represented and what it looks like. So we're going to start today's conversation to make sure that we don't miss the important step of defining what equity will look like for this work. And the easiest way that we thought we could do that is just to really break it out by the various phases of the work. So we're going to just quickly kind of scan through this, and then I'm going to bring us to a interactive Google Doc that will allow us to kind of pick your brains about what you feel is or isn't represented in the equity framework that we have laid out. And then also, who are the actual stakeholders and folks that that need to be seen in this work, which would be really, really impossible. So let me just walk us through this. And Colette, you know what you can do? Why don't you take us off of your screen share? Take us off of your screen share, Colette, and I will jump us to the document that we're going to start to work with. So we'll put this link into the chat for folks to see this. And so we have a large group and we want to hear from you, but we also know that with so many folks on the line, it may be easier for folks to type in and share their feedback. So I'm going to walk us through each of these 5 phases of the equity framework as it pertains to the work of the task force. And what we want to pick your brains around is really a couple key questions, really. What do you think is missing in these elements that needs to be represented? Like, what aren't you seeing that we want to make sure gets represented? And then also, if there's something else that you feel is really great and important for us to make sure that we make more explicit, we want to get your feedback on that as well. So for the 5 phases of the work, we have vision setting, and our commitment from an equity standpoint is to make sure that we agree, first off, to a shared understanding of what equity representation looks like and what the priority stakeholder groups are going to be in the development of an equity-focused process. So we just want to make sure we're not making assumptions about what equity looks like. We want to make sure we call out specifically who are those student, community, workforce groups that must be seen in the process and must be represented. During our research collection and data phase, we're going to do our best to make sure that where there's information available, we're going to collect disaggregated data and identify the impact of current strategies, policies, and programs on all of the priority stakeholder groups that we want to see represented in our work. With stakeholder engagement, as we said, we're going to be going deeply into 5 regions throughout the state to conduct conversations with stakeholders to better understand their experience and incorporate what they're facing and what they're trying to advance, because they're the closest to the problem, they're closest to the work. We'll make sure we're incorporating that back into the work of the task force. When it comes to coherence and scenario development, we just want to make sure that when we think about the way that the segments work together and partner coordinate, we want to prioritize and give more weight to whatever strategies are expected to have the greatest impact on equity for our priority stakeholders. So there may be lots that we're going to see and that we're going to discuss, but the ones that really do give more weight to folks that we want to make sure get represented the most, we want to make sure that we prioritize those. And lastly, when it comes to our recommendations and our dissemination strategy, we just want to make sure that the needs of our priority stakeholders regarding policy, implementation, or resource allocation, that those are given the greatest priority first, and that whatever way that we actually disseminate and share this work with the public, that we make sure that the recommendations are accessible to all stakeholders. So that includes folks that are experiencing some digital inequities and other folks that may need translation in other languages. We want to make sure that we're never making assumptions about who can see the output of this good work. So what I'd love to do now is take a pause and see, as you look across these 5 phases, just what comes to mind. If there's something that you feel needs to be more explicitly articulated, we'd love to hear your words about that. Feel free to type it into the Google Doc directly and share your thoughts, but we also welcome folks that may want to give voice to their thoughts and their reflections as they look at across the framework, across our 5 phases. So love to hear your thoughts. What are folks seeing or not seeing that they feel needs to be given voice as we start this important work?
Carl?
Yes.
Oh, are we just supposed to type in?
You can type in directly, but we love to hear your share out as well. So if folks want to share out, we love to hear that, but we also have the folks that they can type in some of their feedback as well.
Yeah, a couple of things in the stakeholder group. This is Nathan Brostrom. One thing that really struck me in the material that was shared by California Competes is the large percentage of Californians who have some college. So I want to make sure in the stakeholders we reach out to working adults and others who we want to stress degree completion for. And then one other group that's not represented there, but is underrepresented in both UC and CSU are rural Californians. So I want to make sure that we include them as a group. Thanks for that, Nathan.
And I see some other really good, important
Carl,
comments. Oh, yeah, please, other folks.
yeah, I have a question around stakeholder engagement. I'm just wondering, will this just be general? Anybody in the region will be able to participate? Are you focused on, you know, faculty, staff, students at the university? Are you going to reach out to universities for contacts, or how? I guess if you can go a little bit more in depth into how.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Michael, for that question. We do. So we're having very extensive, thorough conversations across the board. So it's absolutely going to include your institutional leaders at your community colleges in the region, the four-year institutions, but we're also going to involve our K-12 leaders at county offices of education. Also, all those important workforce and cross-sector agencies that really work to bring regions together to work collaboratively. We're going to do a deep dive around that, as well as just some of those important civic leaders, whether it's around advocacy or it's with community investment, or community organizing. We're going to make sure to include those voices. And we're absolutely going to do focus groups with students and parents. And that's going to be across the board. So it's your adult students and community college students, students that are in career technical programs, your traditional four-year institutions, as well as K-12 students and parents. So we're going to make sure that we try to cover the gamut to represent really, because we know every region is different and there is no kind of one-size-fits-all approach that's going to get at the needs of the state as diverse and as large as California. And so we are making sure that we have a very robust representation from the conversations that we're going to have across the regions.
Carl, this is Millie.
Yeah, Millie, yeah.
I expand from parents to families, number one, and number two, to ensure that we do it in multiple languages. My experience in California was to bring in people from the Vietnamese community, the Latino community, speak to the families about what we are trying to ascertain and get their input. We always want to do things in monolingual ways, and my experience in California, when we had Es El Momento, we had 50,000 people on our campus, all in Spanish, trying to learn how to get their kids into college. So.
Really appreciate that, Millie. Thank you. You're absolutely right. Part of this is the access and the engagement, and having the ability to engage communities that, you know, speak different languages and that don't always have students that live at home with their parents is really important. And so what we're approaching that work around, Millie, is to work with those regional entities that have the best relationships and connections within the area and let them coordinate and organize and get us as close to those students that represent the broad spectrum of the families and students and the community members that are in that area. And so we're being really smart to tap into as much local expertise and connection as we can, because that's where the relationships really live and that's where the trust really exists. And we're going to work through them to make sure that those conversations are safe and engaging and inclusive. So really appreciate that thinking and that feedback. So we're going to try to do, because I'm mindful of time, we're going to do two things here as we get your feedback on other areas. If you scroll down and look at the rest of the spreadsheet, and I see you all are doing it now, we also call out in the equity framework actual like student and stakeholder demographics and groups. And so as you folks are doing that now, we welcome additional thoughts around just, are there other student and stakeholder demographics and groups that we want to make sure we call out. So love the fact that you all have already jumped into that. So as you think about this equity conversation, please feel free to share and to jot down your thoughts across both the framework layout as well as the student demographic and stakeholder group priorities that we want to make sure that we articulate. So I'd love to hear additional thoughts. Some of you that might have typed in some of your thoughts around the framework or around the stakeholders. We'd love to hear more. So please, I'm going to actually take us off of screen share while folks do that. And we'd just love to hear other thoughts for you to make sure that we are making sure that the unseen gets seen through the process, and to make sure that we are being explicit as we can about the way equity needs to be represented in the work ahead.
Carl, I have a question. As
Go ahead,
I'm
Monica.
looking at all of this, how do we take into account the moment in which we find ourselves and the lack of data that we have about how students have been impacted by the pandemic, are making decisions about whether returning or not, you know, family income, just all of the pressure. So as you're gathering data, it may be from a moment in time that is no longer reflective of what the current situation is. And so if this is about not returning to the past, but understanding the dynamics of the moment, how are you thinking about that confluence?
And I think that's a great question, Mike. And I think we welcome everyone's thoughts around that as well. I think that's where we really are prioritizing our regional conversations. So we understand that data is sometimes limited, sometimes delayed, and it's really, really hard to only go by the numbers. And so our balance for that is those stakeholder conversations. We're doing those in real time in the moment. We understand that COVID has introduced a ton of exacerbated inequities that are widening gaps and placing more burden on folks. But we also know that a lot of these inequities have been lasting for a long time. And so there are certain historic realities that folks in our regions are dealing with that need to be articulated in a way that this group understands what the real opportunity really is. I think our segments have done a great job within the state of trying to address them, but we have a big state and it's tough to do things at scale. And our regional diversity requires us to be much more differentiated in how we roll out stuff and engage local communities. So our best approach for that right now, Monica, is to make sure that we're being as thoughtful and as engaging around those regional conversations, and to not go into those conversations looking for an answer or looking for something that you want to hear. It's really about being still, being empathetic, and really listening and letting people talk and letting people share, so that you actually can hear with honest ears what folks are experiencing. And to us, the hope is that that reality and that insight from the firsthand knowledge of communities and students and families will be a great way to cross-check against what maybe historical data trends have shown us.
And just to be really specific, we're using an empathy-based interview protocol for individual interviews with students and families, and when we're doing them in focus groups, to ask people to give us examples, to tell us their stories, to understand the tension points, to listen for their aspirations and the differences between, you know, before and now, because we know that a lot of thoughts, concerns, aspirations, financial circumstances have changed significantly in the last 6 months. And so what are they looking at now? And so we've structured the interview protocols such that we are listening carefully to those stories and where people are feeling pinched, what they're concerned about, and what they're weighing back and forth in terms of what they need now that may be the same or may be different than what they needed 6 or 12 months ago.
I'd love to hear and welcome other thoughts as well. This is really, you all will own this process, and that question Monica brought up is really important. Others have asked about data and want to get their hands on data. And so we're grounding a lot in those stakeholder conversations, but would love to also just hear, do you feel like that's enough? Are there other ways that we feel like we can really get at the heart of making sure that we're fully informed? Haley, you might have raised your hand earlier. Did you want to share some reflections?
Sure. I'm always such a dorky rule follower in Zoom using that hand raise function. Just a really tangible suggestion for the stakeholder engagement piece is just making sure to offer some of those engagement opportunities to be thoughtful about different time zones. I'm thinking about a lot of our international students are impacted in really complex and unique ways by some of the changes going on in light of the pandemic. So I just want to make sure that these opportunities to provide feedback are offered at times that make sense for folks that might not be in the US right now.
Great reflection, Haley. Thank you so much. Other thoughts? I hesitate to go back to screen share to see the comments you all are putting in, but would love to just hear other thinking around, you know, what missteps do we not want to take when it comes to prioritizing equity? And also, are there any other communities or student identities that we want to make sure we prioritize that you all aren't seeing or haven't been raised so far? Michelle, looks like you've come off mute. Do you want to?
Yeah,
well, both Michelle.
I'll let that other Michelle talk first.
Thanks. Hi, Grace. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we, in our drive to have a long list of stakeholders, that we don't shy away from the kind of specificity that is absolutely required for California. I am troubled looking at that list, feeling like it's the kitchen sink list of all Californians versus the intentional list of what we have to do to make sure that Latinx students are prepared for college at the same rate as everyone else. That Black students don't just go to college, they actually complete college. So that is concerning to me. And also, I think as we talk about vision setting and equity, there has to be an honest conversation about whether or not we will have the courage to make the difficult decisions in funding and resourcing and financial aid that are necessary when we talk about equity. Because what we have now is everybody talking about equity and being comfortable talking about equity, but we still fund and support institutions and individuals in a very unequitable way.
Thanks for that, Michelle. Couldn't agree more. Where your equity priority, really shows up oftentimes comes in resource allocation and funding. So really appreciate that additional insight and the need to make sure that we're not trying to boil the ocean, and to be really smart and intentional about the best way to leverage this opportunity for the students that are most in need. So appreciate that comment. Michelle Cooper, we'll let you go next, and then I think Keith, you may have wanted to hop in with some thoughts. So Michelle Cooper and then Keith.
My point is identical to what Michelle Siqueiros just mentioned. And all I would say is that just make sure that we're not ignoring. I think a lot of time when we add these very comprehensive lists, that we dilute the impact of race and ethnicity. And I don't want to make sure that we are not doing that here, that we're looking at everything just so we don't focus on the real core issue, which is often one of race.
Really important to be said, Michelle, so thank you. Keith, did you want to hop in as well?
Sorry, I'm sorry. I was putting stuff in the chat and I was going back and forth. I put a lot of my comments on the document. I think I go back to Michelle's comment is we're trying to, we can't do it all for everyone at this time. So I think the data has to guide the direction that we go as relates to equity. But I'm really concerned about the data and the common sets of data, because we need to be able to collect the same type of, it's not apples to apples, right? And so how can we begin to have those types of conversations about equity in the state of California where the data is similar and we're able to see across systems how our students, particularly students of color, are doing academically. And so I'm trying to figure out from this conversation, and I put in my notes, about the data and comment sets of data. And one of the things that my campus did this last spring semester, just with COVID-19, we were able to start disaggregating all of our data in regards to technology, regards to how many students took advantage of food resources, to how many students took advantage of our Wi-Fi hotspots, and really break it down by gender, by ethnicity. And so, but not too many of my other colleagues were doing that type of data in the state of California as community colleges. So how are we able to have some of these conversations about data where we have a common set of data across systems? And I think that would be very helpful to us. Just my thought.
Really well said, Keith. Our next meeting, we really will be prioritizing research and data that we're beginning to collect. A big priority for that is going to be trying to uncover just gaps in the system and what's really at the root of those gaps. But what you're bringing up as well is just the right way to weigh and compare and analyze the things that we're seeing. And so we very well may need to commit to some way of norming what we're hearing across the various sources of information. And so we'll make a note of that for our team to maybe have some suggestions for the best way to do that. Because you're right, it's tough to truly assess need and opportunity without having some norming across various data sources and the variety across those sources.
Okay, and if I can make one more comment, and I'm going to leave this alone, is that thinking about equity and the potential with Prop 16 passing, what would that look like? And we had an earlier conversation, I think it was Sean Harper brought up the faculty and staff and the diversity of our institutions. I think that's very critical. And we have to figure out some type of way to change the demographics of our faculty and staff and administrators, especially in community colleges, because it does not reflect the demographics of our student population. And if we don't be intentional about this now, then we can just forget about it. Think about this from my campus. I'm going to leave this alone. I have 12 white students who are enrolled in English 1A. 12. Right? Out of those 12, I have 11 faculty members who, I have 12 faculty members who are white in English. I have 11 students who are white in English for English 1A transfer level. That's problematic. Our campus is 60% Latinx and 23% African American, but all my English faculty are all white. And whenever I get English finalists, they're all white. And that was done research by the RP group. They did a study on AB 705. I have the report. You might want to see it. But they went through and did the demographics. They did all that. And that was very telling.
Thanks for sharing that, Keith. You can't argue. You can't argue that point. There's so many things that we're going to have the chance to vet. Some of it will be state level, but a lot of it's going to be, institutional, close to the ground. And so to your point, the best way to interrogate the viability and the opportunity for those strategies that are closer to the ground is to have the data to kind of show really how bad the problem is and really what is at the heart of inequities that just persist. So you're driving home some really important points that we have to make sure we don't, they don't get lost in the way we're going to be, just interrogating these challenges moving forward. Okay, we're about at time to need to transition to let you all start thinking about the vision for the final work, but I know there are a couple more hands raised. So if we wanted to maybe one, no more than two additional comments. I see you put in a ton of feedback on the Google Doc, so thank you for that. We're going to take all that and incorporate it into our future meetings, but one or two more comments that folks want to voice before we move on.
Yeah, I wanted to really quickly bring up, I think, the importance of staying flexible. Just in general, I think to the point that Monica raised, that, we have to make sure that we're not creating things that are based on just this point in time and make sure that we're trying to look forward to the future. I'm also thinking about how fluid students' lives can be. And how, for example, the way that the current system was set up, if something happened and for some reason you needed to go home next semester, let's say someone in your family is having health challenges, you might have to take a semester off, and that semester off turns into a year off, and you just might not come back. But you know, I've seen programs that popped up. I'll note Fresno State that comes up to my head, that have created a program where students can come home to a campus that's closer to them, and maybe have a different admissions timeline for that. If something happens, how can I continue my education closer to home without having to restart the entire transfer pathway?
Matt, I just add that one of my, this is Gabby, one of my continuing difficulties is the multiple ways in which people understand ideas of equity and equality. And in our strategic planning, we came to the conclusion that we would use our focus exclusively for what we think of as the components of academic equity, recognizing that we cannot create social equity in any of our institutions on our campuses or around the world without first focusing on academic equity. And I would just like to propose that we really put front and center the question of what are the components of academic equity, and try not to be pushed too far to repair areas of social equity that are far beyond our ability to tackle.
Thank you for that, Gabby. That's a very important distinction that cannot get lost in, you know, the impact we're looking to have with this process. Okay, really appreciate all the insight, the great feedback and input. Appreciated also the question about if there are just other reports or data sources that you all want to share with us. Love that you're all putting that in the chat, so please keep those coming. We're going to be tapping into you far more than just in these task force calls, whether it's sources of data and information, whether it's contacting folks in different regions that you feel are really important for us to connect with, whether it's folks on your teams, your respective teams that you feel like could be a part of our working groups. We're going to make sure that we maximize all that you all have to offer for this work. And so appreciate you being so generous, and we're going to take you up on your generosity and keep coming back to you with all the great wealth of resources and insights and connections that you all have. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Susan, because you're going to transition us to discuss the guiding vision for this work. And I will screen share and put up the next slide for you to get us going with that, Susan. Thank you all.
Great, thank you, Carl. And we will push information back out to you to answer some of these questions and to raise others as we go forward. So this is the beginning, not the end, of the conversation that we're going to be having in particular about equity and where we're headed. You all have been at the work of students to gain degrees and credentials, to access the right opportunities for them for many years. And part of what we want to be able to do is to have a conversation about some of the things that you are thinking, that you are experiencing on your campuses or in your work and in your systems, and really answer three questions today and gather a lot of information and input along the way. One is, what does California post-secondary system need to accomplish in order to recover from COVID more integrated, more equitable, more resilient, and more aligned with the economic needs of the state, right? So COVID is our moment in time, and there are things that we probably needed to do to improve the system even before COVID because it was not completely equitable or working for everyone. So we have an opportunity to think about that. The second is, what should the California system look like to maximize student experiences and outcomes? What are the system behaviors that might need to change or be different as a result of this? If we're really there to support students and to change outcomes for Black and Latinx students, for example, in particular, what are the things that might need to change? What does the system need to look like from our perspectives? And then later we'll marry up our perspectives with the perspectives of students on the ground and how they talk about it, what they say they need. And we'll do that later in the process. And then finally, are there some promising strategies that you've seen in other places that you've been thinking about? We did a lot of reading about the need to make sure that we are prioritizing, for example. Does it make sense to prioritize financial aid for those students who need it the most? To think about the world a little bit differently, to think about, you know, what happens with the 90% of students who are very nervous about an online learning environment? What do we need to be thinking about there? Is it really an all or nothing perspective? What about students who need and deserve the kind of access to the technology even to make that go? Should we be thinking about competency-based education? What are the variety of things that you believe might be some of the promising strategies that you've either seen implemented elsewhere that we should consider for California, or some ideas or bubbling up of new work that you believe holds promise that should be at least on the table for discussion? We really want to be able to mine your brains on that work. What we're going to do is really get you talking to each other. We are going to have a note taker and a facilitator in each of the rooms, so you don't have to worry about necessarily putting anything in a Google Doc. We'll be doing that for you as we have the conversation. And while we want to grab as much of your thinking as possible on potential solutions, there's going to be a tension, right? Because if we're designing for equity, we also want to make sure that we are listening carefully to the needs of the users and the students as they express them, and solutions as they might see them, and marry that up with the work that you're going to put on the table today. And that's really the work of this whole committee, so that we come up with, at the end of the day, recommendations that are student and user experience based, that are equitable, and are informed by some of the best practices and best thinkers from around the country. So those are the three questions that we are going to be dealing with as we go into the work. And I would invite each of you to come into groups. You'll have an Ed First facilitator who will introduce themselves as they get there. You've already met verbally Carl and I, and Jackie King, who is also on this call, is going to be a facilitator. And we'll have an Ed First or a CFF note taker in each of our rooms as well. So Colette, if you
and Susan,
could,
can I just
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say really quick? So just so you all know, we're going to be taking those notes all on the same Google Doc. So if you just kind of scroll to the bottom, you'll see where each group has a section to take notes. And we're going to come back like right about the top of the hour to let everyone reflect and share out with just kind of what resonated with them during their conversations. So just want to flag that you'll probably see a notice about 5 minutes before. So you'll know that countdown means we're going to be pulled back into the big group. So don't feel too, you're not going to like it because you're going to be engulfed in conversation, but just know that we want to be mindful of you all's time. So that's what we'll do. Now we'll come back together in about 20 minutes. Great. All right, any questions before we do that? conversations in the months ahead.
Welcome back. We'll give it a moment so everybody can get back on screen, because we want to have a joint conversation about what you discussed in your groups. And it looks like we're almost all here. Lovely. So we'd love to be able to share some insights across groups from where we started, and I'll kind of kick us off with group 2. And Haley, I wonder if you could share some highlights and some big takeaways from the experience that you had in group 2.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I took a couple quick notes, not exhaustive, of the conversation from my group. So a couple key points that we hit in our conversation was a shared interest in making sure that higher education in California moves towards better reflecting the demographics of California, that we're having better 4-year graduation rates. There was a really insightful point made about acknowledging the reality that a lot of decisions being made in higher ed during the pandemic are business decisions, which do not necessarily align with some of the equity goals undergirding our work as a task force. So how to really grapple with the business element of higher ed. How to make sure that funding decisions align with equity goals, whether that's investing in institutions that are doing a great job of admitting and serving students of color, or investing in particular programs. Recognizing the important role that professional learning plays in helping us advance towards equity goals. That could be for faculty, but also for our administrators and our trustees and regents. And then also we had a broader comment made towards the end about the pandemic potentially serving as an opportunity to dismantle some of these long-standing barriers in systems that have been keeping us from a more equitable education system.
Thanks, Haley. I would love for anyone to take one of those ideas and run with it, or to identify what was a takeaway for you in one of your groups.
I can speak up for group 3. And Haley, that was fantastic comments as well. I think you brought up really good points. I think for me, the substantive part of our conversation was realizing that all institutions are different, and so are student bodies. But what they do need is, students need a very similar set of resources that not all institutions are prepared to give. So we need to, as a state, leverage existing resources. Look at a regional level, look at what institutions are close by, look at what students need, look what institutions are able to provide, and see if there's a way to actually connect students to the appropriate resources that they need if the institution is not able to provide that. We also did discuss, especially near the end of our discussion, how racial equity is extremely important to being central to this conversation, and how it is also connected to a lot of the other inequities that we're seeing, and how it's all connected and part of a bigger conversation. When we talk about racial equity, that there's a lot of depth to that conversation, and it also affects other areas. And in my view, there are a lot of conversations when we talk about first generation students, when we talk about returning students, that a lot of these are structural racism issues, and people do not want to categorize them in that way, but that's the reality that we're living in.
I also in our group spoke about connecting our institutions to the workforce needs, and also how to develop employment opportunities for our students. That was an important sector, and how we might connect our institutions to the broader society.
Other thoughts?
Susan, I didn't ask group number one. I didn't ask group number 1 to have a spokesperson. So anyone in group 1, just definitely feel free to share. There were a lot of great points made. So happy to let anyone or all you all kind of speak up on what we discussed.
Well, I'll jump in. We had a great conversation about the opportunity this pandemic is presenting in terms of better coordination across not just higher education, but K-12, about tackling, you know, wow, couldn't we at least finally fix transfer in California as a very clear target that we would want to achieve? And really thinking about a lot of the innovation that we have seen in response to the pandemic, but also highlighting some of the very clear needs, right? Like Wi-Fi broadband and technology is essential for any student in K-12 or higher ed. And Nathan, I'll turn it to you because I know I'm missing a few things.
No, Brian raised a very good point, which is it's not just about access to higher education. We really have to focus on helping students persist and complete their degrees. And a lot of that is about where we're going to allocate resources. You know, UC Merced, we've had great success in that. We found that there are sort of two overarching issues. One is, you know, does a faculty member know you by name? Undergraduate research is one of the biggest predictors of time to degree and degree completion. And then the other is just shrinking the size of the campus. You know, we're 74% first generation. The more that you have small groups, you know, living learning communities, even intercollegiate athletics, that really goes a long way to completion and making sure that you stay on campus and are not drawn, especially during the pandemic, to the you know, myriad needs that you have at home. So I think that's one thing that we really, and that will also, you know, help our throughput. If people are graduating in 4 years rather than 6 years, that's a 50% increase in the number of students we can accommodate.
I would just as part of what we're talking about too is given this opportunity that we don't constrain our big thinking with the issue of cost or what it'll take right now, because we're all pragmatic and have lived in the higher ed world, but give ourselves license to really rethink what this can be and worry about the pragmatism of what's possible after, because if we start with that, I think we'll be thinking too small. And if this is a critical shot, we've got to seize it now. And that means maybe some harebrained or off the wall stuff, but I think that's what it's going to take, or we're going to perpetuate the same thing we've done or maybe tweak around the edges. And we have to be better than that for our students. We have to do better.
I would just say that the thing that I shared was that, you know, the system is perfectly designed to get the results it's getting. And if you look at all the data and you see that, how it is, also know that it has always been designed to center whiteness. It was built entirely around white people, and the culture of higher education historically, it's based on white supremacy. So we have to understand that it's going to be systematic design that we need to do. That work is possible, but the way that you do it is we have to focus on the most vulnerable population like it should. It needs to work and be optimized for a Black student, adult with children, from a low-income background, first generation, like it literally, we have to think of that like student. And so we talked about journey mapping, and I think that there's already been a collection of the wisdom in California. People know what some of those things are, and if we could accumulate those and actually figure out, it would drive some of the decision points where we can clearly narrow our focus. Because I really do think right now you can make decisions you will never get a chance again to make. And if it's a small list, but there are things that are possible right now that are very, very realistically something that could completely change the future of California.
Keith, you got your hand up. Would love to hear what you're thinking. Thank you, Bridget.
Bridget, I've never met you before, but what you just said is right on target, because I truly believe that right now is a perfect time to blow up the system and rebuild a system that's particularly set up for our students and the students of color that we currently serve. And I think we have to be bold right now and do this. And Tim, my staff went to Georgia State last spring, and you set it up for us to look at your guided pathways model and what you're doing for support services. And I know we're one of a very few California community colleges went out there to see your model. And I truly believe that we can blow up the system and make it better for our students, but we have to be bold and courageous and not scared to do this. But right now is the only time we can do it, but we got to blow it up.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. And yeah, it's completely scalable, and it's something that actually brings resources to the institution by holding on to students who otherwise walk away. So agree with you 100%.
Monica and then Michelle, because I think you both had your hands up. No, Michelle? Or maybe you were just clapping.
I was giving a thumbs up to what Bridget was saying, but also now to Keith and the opportunity in front of us. This is what we've been saying, which is that a window is open right now that we otherwise thought was impossible to navigate through. And we need to take advantage of that. And I love this idea of what Bridget just said, which is that the system was built for a student population of 150 years ago. And what we need to do is redesign around what is the student of today. And that means, I don't want to say clean slate because that's probably too much, but a full redesign and rethinking about what do these students need to be successful and organize our systems around them. So I just love this. I'm having a great time here.
Other thoughts on that score? Because I want to nudge you even further to what you think some of those things might be, or what some of those additional changes might look like, because we have a pretty austere group here who's been around. So other thinking along that same vein?
I think that this is first an extremely inspiring conversation. So thank you all for providing your thoughts. I think that we need to think about, all the different types of students that might even try to attend the university. Because I'm thinking that we have a community, we have communities basically in every institution that receive a new set of students every single year, a new set of students with a whole different type of ideals, whole different type of experiences. But however, as we discussed previously, sometimes do not have the people prepared to meet these students. And so how do we make sure that when a student arrives that they're, being able to be given the resources, meet the people that they need to meet in order to be successful? I think most students can think of that one or two people that if they didn't meet throughout their time in the institution, that their experience would have been a lot more challenging, would have been a lot more different. So how do we, as we think about the new system in the future of higher education, how do we also think about how students can come in and meet that person early on, meet that person that they need to meet, and how does that not happen by chance in a hallway, and how does that happen in a way that we can really think about it intentionally?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and just say that kind of after hearing Deborah and Keith talk about the need to just be crazier and bolder and blow it up entirely. I totally appreciate being in a space where we've gone almost 2 hours and not a single person has blamed students for their failure to succeed in higher education, where we've, I think, been in a full conversation about what we can do as a state, as colleges, as faculty, as leaders, to build the kind of higher education system that works for our collective interests. So I just felt like acknowledging that. I think maybe because it's the first time I've been in this kind of setting for so long without students being blamed first. So I just want to say I appreciate all of you.
Yeah, and I want to say too that I appreciate that it's been, nearly 2 hours and we haven't wasted our time talking about constraints and what we can't do. I too am feeling inspired by, the call to action to, radically rethink the way we do this whole thing. One way that we may be bold and, throw something out that's been longstanding is the racelessness with which we have been doing practically everything in higher education for far too long. We moving forward, we ought not continue in raceless policymaking, raceless curriculum, raceless hiring practices. I do think that if we are really going to, take on the responsibility, frankly, of making California higher education more reflective of the students who are actually in it, that we're going to have to be much more race salient and race conscious in our policy making and in our practice.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely. In the spirit of being bold and kind of blowing up traditional systems, I know that the community college system is attempting to move towards a new funding formula, a lot more performance-based and equity-based funding models. And to me, it has never made sense to fund schools based on full-time enrollment status, FTES. In my mind, that incentivizes keeping students in a 6-year track, keeping students as long as possible to complete their degrees. So if we can throw that out, that's something that I'm all for.
Thank you.
You know, I also think about how we get more people of color to be faculty and administrators in higher ed. And we need to start earlier. How many of our students in our neighborhoods really think about being a faculty member at a college or university, or really think about becoming a president of a college or a vice president or dean? These options are not really presented to students early on. And we just take for granted that people will know about it, but they don't. And what's our responsibility in bringing along that next generation of people, starting early, very early, and talk about the options, which they don't really hear.
Absolutely.
So one of the ways that privilege manifests itself in the system is in having the supports, the background to navigate the complexity, all the barriers that the systems throw, institutions throw up in front of students. And to go back to Bridget's notion of journey mapping, identifying for that most at-risk population, exactly what those are, starting, you know, in high school, if it's a direct from high school student, or as adults, identifying what are these concretely, what are these barriers that get presented to students that are so time consuming and require so much effort to navigate and overcome.
Absolutely. Just looking at the screen, seeing who else might want to dive in here in the last couple of minutes.
I put my hand up. Is that okay?
Sure, Keith, go for it.
So there's two things. One, based off of Dr. Garcia's comments and with the support of the College Futures Foundation, Sean Harper is working with our college now to develop a faculty academy to identify individual colors from California community colleges who are interested in being a community college faculty member. And so we're this fall, we're working on developing that program to launch in 2021. And so we're really excited about that, because we think that's one of the ways that we can help diversify our faculty, not only at Compton College, but also in California community college system. And the joke that Sean and I have is that we're trying to train future faculty members from this academy for all the colleges, so that they have to come to us for faculty, and that's our goal. The second piece that I wanted to comment on as we think about how we move forward as a group is to really look at who's in this room. My fear when I look at California community colleges and where we're headed is how do we engage our faculty, and maybe having a subcommittee but trying to get some faculty leaders involved in this conversation, because we're going to need some champions once this report comes out and recommendations. And if faculty look, I don't know how many of us are here that are faculty in the system, but if they don't see representation of faculty, then that at the beginning of the day, they just want to push it to the side to say that we weren't in the room. So I think we need to be cautious of that and figure out how to attack that early on, and to make sure that we have some type of faculty representation, and maybe even a subcommittee of faculty members from across the systems involved in this conversation and get their buy-in, so that they could be our champions with our other faculty throughout our systems.
Keith, that's a really great point. I wonder if any of the other segment leaders have already heard from their local academic senates. I know I certainly did, but what I'll highlight here is that we've been working on diversifying our faculty over the last 2 years. We're entering year 3 of this work, and I'll tell you that in the beginning, they thought that we didn't have a problem. They completely denied it. Fast forward to where we are today, they are the #1 champions, for good or bad. What that also means is that the only way that we could get them to come to the table, and I bring it up here, is by allowing those who have been disempowered for decades within our own system to speak for themselves. And so in the work that we did, we actually, because when you invite faculty, and certainly our statewide leaders, they will not look like the people that need to be at the table. And so we were very intentional in bringing a panel of first generation faculty, right? Faculty of color, those very afraid to lose their jobs had to decide not to participate in our very honest conversations of talking about their journey and what it means to be a faculty of color, first generation in academia. And we had to bring a panel of tenured faculty who are first gen faculty of color, extremely qualified, all PhDs, who basically just said, I don't have to work here. I am a PhD, I could work anywhere, but I choose to be here because of the population that we are serving. So I think as we think about engaging our faculty across all the segments, we should see it as an opportunity for collaboration. And I like the idea of a work group, but I would even challenge that and just say, I think it's just another panel. It is another voice that needs to join us as we think about the next generation of California and what we could do for the state.
Thank you. One more note, Bridget, and then we're going to close this segment down. So go ahead.
Well, I do think that right now in the midst of COVID, there's a huge opportunity. And what I'm recommending to other states is that you literally have all the smart people who already work for you. And right now they need to actually be connected in conversations specifically about where you need to be pivoting your current programmatic offerings, where you're seeing small business owners needing to pivot, where are there clear places that the economy, like that, we shouldn't do a degree in that anymore. Like that's gone now. Those need to be not just happening with the UCs or the CSU. It needs to be a cohesive conversation across discipline, because the way that your economy is going to change, you have a very narrow window where the smart people getting together, actually, they should be identifying where these changes should happen right away. And I think that's just one thing that if you want to give them a role, like they literally have to make these decisions at some point. We can either keep doing this, but it's also not advancing degree programs, because we know that that's not what the issue is going to be. It's going to be people who had their dreams dashed and need to completely reinvent who they are, and very quickly. And so what does that look like for the future of California? I think your faculty already know it. And I think that's a separate thing, but it will be the missing piece for us, for our work to connect to.
Thank you so much. We're going to do a wrap up. I know this is going to feel a little bit dissatisfying not to get to some real hard outcomes today, other than I think that the ideas and the sharing that you've done is a incredible start to this important work. At some point in time, we'll need to identify what are mid-level recommendations and outcomes, what are long-term recommendations and outcomes, and we will grapple with, what do students say they need? What do faculty say they need? What does this group prioritize as a need, and come together around some of those recommendations? But we are grateful for your time on this, and this is the perfect way to begin. And as we move down the road, part of what we will need to reckon with are what are some of the constraints that create what we want to have happen now as a mid-level recommendation or as a long-term recommendation. But we'll reckon with that in our next set of conversations. And also want you to start to think about one of the things that Londe put down as a primary concern is, what can we do together within systems, across systems right away? What are those things that we can make real immediately at this moment in time, as well as those things that will set us up for mid-level and long-term outcomes going forward? I'm going to turn it over to Carl, because he's going to close us out, but he's also going to give some opportunities for you to send information or names our way, because we're also hearing you that in higher education, there's nothing more important than both serving students and engaging faculty if you want change to happen and stick, right? So we will have some opportunities for thinking about what is the faculty portion of the engagement in some of these areas where their expertise is going to be absolutely critical going forward. So I'll turn it over to Carl.
Thanks, Susan. I was just loving that exchange and sharing. Just thank you all for being so motivated, being so convicted, being true leaders, being bold and brave in this, because I think this is what it's going to take. Just a really quick, I've just seen really good comments in the chat. So to our EdFirst note takers, can you please make sure we cut and paste all the good thoughts that are being captured in the chat room as well. And then I have the displeasure of wrapping us up. I'm sorry, folks, but you all have important day jobs that you have to get to, so we'll make sure you get you back to your teams. So in terms of next steps, we're just getting started. So this journey is just going, but we want to make sure that along the way we're learning and getting better and hearing back from you. So you all will get a short feedback survey at the end of every one of our task force meetings. It's about 5 minutes. So you'll see that go out to you all. We really appreciate if you could take the time and just give us your candid thoughts and feedback, because we want to make sure that we're incorporating that to make every meeting experience rewarding and fruitful for the group. We'll also send out notes from this call, so you all can have that to kind of reflect and share. We'll definitely make any necessary updates that came from your input around the equity framework and the priority stakeholder list. So we'll update that and have that just in our library of resources. And we're going to make sure we come back to that. We're going to revisit that framework, because we got to make sure that we don't lose sight of holding ourselves accountable to what's really important with this work. And we're going to be making sure that we schedule the remaining task force meetings. That's already gone out to your admin teams and you directly. And so you should expect to see some new invites pop up on your calendar soon to reflect how we're going to be getting together in the next few months. So those are the immediate next steps. In terms of kind of what's on deck next, in between these meetings, we're going very hard, very fast, and very deep with our regional stakeholder engagement. So as Susan said, we are open and collecting all good leads and suggestions on where and who we should talk with. So what we'll do coming out of this call is tee up a sheet that'll allow you all to give us input based on the different regions that we're going to be having conversations. And those will be ongoing conversations. So we're more than happy to engage and entertain, whether it's panels or individuals or experts that you feel we should talk to. We want to hear from you, just who you know and who you recommend that we make sure we don't overlook in those conversations. We're also going to be doing some pretty heavy desk research and literature review, very similar to what you saw in the summary piece that we had for the pre-reading. We're going to be making sure that we are scouring all good resources for data and promising ideas and good insights into, gaps and needs. So all that good sources you all shared with us in the chat, feel free to keep sending us things your way as you see them. You can forward them to us, and we're happy to, integrate that in our research and our work. And lastly, we got to get these work groups organized. So the work groups are going to be where we go deep. So these first couple of meetings, we are, thinking as big as we can and just trying to amass as much, good thinking as we can across the group. But by the second meeting, we're going to try to start to prioritize where we're going to, see the real opportunities to take action. And that will then be the marching orders for the working groups. So we want those working groups to be able to kind of hit the ground running coming out of our September meeting. So in advance of that, we're going to be soliciting your ideas around either if you want to volunteer to be in a group, or if you want to suggest either a colleague or someone from your teams that you feel will be great. We want your input for those. Those aren't going to be big groups. They're going to be pretty tight, like maybe 5 or so folks, so they can really go deep. We're going to try to structure them around priority topics, and then unpack those topics as a group. And those groups will be meeting throughout the rest of the task force process. So even as the big group is meeting, the working groups are going to be doing their work in between and funneling information and ideas and, tighten strategies back to our larger group to interrogate and vet and talk through and give them feedback as that work moves forward. So we're just getting started. We're trying to tap you all with your good information, your good insight to how we should be navigating this work. So with that, just a quick preview about the September meeting. We're going to have some preliminary findings from our desk research and from our initial regional conversations. We're going to bring that back to you all to digest. You'll get something in advance to kind of work through, but in the call, we're going to let you all kind of unpack that and process that as a group. and really push you all to go deep with the root cause analysis. None of that good intelligence is going to help us if we don't let that inform and elevate like where the real gaps in the system are. And I mean, I appreciate what you said, Bridget, like where folks just continually are hitting roadblocks and barriers and hassles and challenges. So we want to come out of September really clear about what that looks like, and then start to workshop as a group. All right, so what are some possible solution areas to address those gaps and those root causes? Because like I said, that's going to inform where the working groups start and get to work. So our September meeting, we have a meeting date on the books right now for early September. However, that meeting was only scheduled for 2 hours. And our guess is we may need more than 2 hours when we really start to get into this work. I think 2 hours worked for our first kickoff call today, but we may need more time. So we're going to try to attempt to carve out 3-hour chunks for our remaining meetings, if you don't mind. We want to just keep tapping into all that good energy. So we're going to be updating our September meeting date and times, and then also scheduling out the rest of the meetings for the rest of the fall, because we know calendars fill up. And of course, we're going to send pre-work around that in advance. I think that may be all we have as far as next steps. So before we wrap up, just thank you all. You've been amazing. If this is a preview of what's ahead, I'm really excited and can't wait for what's to come. Londe, I'll let you kind of close us out with some final words before we let folks go.
Great. Well, my word was inspired, and you lived into it. I have found the conversation invigorating and thought-provoking and inspiring. So I want to just thank all of you for your time. I have to say that, you know, as we were leading up to this, Carl's being very generous. He's like, well, maybe we need more time. I called him. I'm like, there's no way 2 hours is going to work with this group. So I'm like, we need longer time. I just know we're going to get, going. And I think that proved to be true today. So I'm just grateful to have all of you in this virtual space to really be thinking with us about the transformative power of what we can do. And I do think that there is transformative power in what we can do and what we can think about. Michelle Asha Cooper said in our breakout group that as she has been observing what has been happening with COVID-19, the fundamental core of it is rethinking the business model for higher education. Because if we want, and I think Keith was the one who said, if we want to sustain any of the things that we think can happen in higher ed, we have to rethink the business model that supports us to do things the way we're doing it now, and how that can change to bring about a different outcome, to the point that Bridget, or was it Bridget that made the point is we're getting exactly what we expect to get. So I think that there's a lot, to me, that's a great working group. I mean, I'll let the folks at Ed first decide what the working groups are, but I think that's the potential for a really interesting working group. There's so much about persistence and completion and the strategies to get there. There's so much about what it means to learn in different formats and to honor different forms of work and learning and teaching, and what it means to uphold quality in this moment and in future moments, and what it means to reach out to and make sure that our institutions are meeting those with the highest degree of educational need. And I think that's the one thing when I go to bed at night that I'm thinking about is, who are the people out there who have the highest degree for education or highest need for education who aren't actually getting access? That's the group that I want to make sure that we are consistently focused on. I can't think of a more exciting and interesting group of people to be thinking through and noodling through those problems with than all of you. I'm just enormously grateful for your time and your energy and your commitment and your passion and your willingness to blow up the box, and your willingness not to blame students, and your willingness to start with, what can we do together and not be constrained. That's it meets all the aspirations that I could have possibly had for this. So thank you. We will meet again in September, and you will certainly be hearing from me likely between now and then. And I'm looking forward to the feedback, and do feel free to be very liberal with your feedback. If there are things that we can tweak to make this a better experience, please, we want to hear it. So thank you all, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
All right, thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.